Sergeant Ramsden, I'd like you to meet Wrangler Jane. This is Sergeant Ramsden of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
We always get our man. And we get our woman, too.
From a 65-year-old stuntman performing death-defying stunts to a teenage star who lied about her age, F Troop was stranger than fiction behind the scenes. This 1960s sitcom featured a tribe name based on a profane joke, got career advice from Mr. Spock himself, and earned praise from silent film legend Buster Keaton. The show's cancellation wasn't due to poor ratings, but corporate greed, and its lookout couldn't see well enough to tell turkeys from attacking warriors. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about F Troop. Fact 1. Mr. Spock launched the captain's career.
Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow?
Before Ken Barry became the lovably clumsy Captain Wilton Parmenter on F Troop, he had an unlikely mentor who would later become famous for playing the most logical character in television history. During Barry's second year in the United States Army, he served in the Special Services Division, which was responsible for entertaining troops at various posts and officers' clubs around the country. His commanding sergeant during this time was none other than Leonard Nimoy, who was still several years away from landing his iconic role as Mr. Spock on Star Trek. Nimoy had already been dabbling in acting and understood how the entertainment industry worked, so when Barry won third place in the All-Army Talent Competition with his performance of the song "There'll Be Some Changes Made," Nimoy saw real potential in the young soldier. The prize for winning the competition was an appearance on Ed Sullivan's Toast of the Town, which was one of the most watched variety shows on television at the time. Barry was excited about the opportunity, but had no idea how to leverage it into a career once he left the Army. That's when Nimoy stepped in and did something remarkable. He told Barry that he needed to get in touch with talent departments at the major Hollywood studios, but Barry admitted he didn't know how to do that. Asking them to watch Barry's performance on The Ed Sullivan Show. The telegrams worked, and Barry received responses from both 20th Century Fox and Universal Studios, ultimately choosing to sign with Universal. Without Nimoy's intervention and belief in his talent, Barry might never have made it to Hollywood, and television audiences would have missed out on one of the most physically gifted comedic actors of the 1960s. Fact 2. The tribe name was censored profanity.
Chief, may I have a riddle for you? What has big round shape, carries man and dog, and flies?
May give up.
The Hekawi tribe wasn't always called the Hekawi, and the original name was based on one of the oldest and dirtiest jokes in comedy history. When the show's creators first developed F Troop, they named the peaceful Native American tribe the Fugawi, which sounds innocent enough until you realize it's a play on the punchline, "Where the fuck are we?" The joke goes that a tribe wandering through unfamiliar territory kept asking themselves this question, which eventually became their tribal name through a convenient misunderstanding. The writers thought they could slip this past the network censors at ABC, banking on the fact that the profanity was hidden inside what appeared to be a made-up Native American tribal name. They even wrote it into early scripts and probably had a good laugh imagining viewers slowly catching on to the joke. However, an eagle-eyed censor spotted the line, "Where the Fugawi," in one of the scripts and immediately understood exactly what the writers were trying to do. The censor flagged it as completely unacceptable for 1965 television, and the creators were ordered to change the name before production could continue. Rather than abandon the joke entirely, the writers simply cleaned it up by changing one letter. The Fugawi became the Hekawi, which was based on the slightly more acceptable phrase, "Where the heck are we?" The show even explained the tribe's name origin in an episode where Chief Wild Eagle tells the story of how his ancestors traveled west over mountains and streams, then fell off a cliff. The medicine man turned to Wild Eagle's ancestor and said, "I think we lost. Where the heck are we?" And that's how the tribe got its name. The sanitized version kept the same comedic spirit while making it past the network censors, though anyone familiar with the original Fugawi joke could still appreciate what the writers had been going for in the first place. Fact 3. Wrangler Jane was only 15 years old.
But it's from Washington, the War Department, Office of the Chief of Staff, stamped official, urgent, and top secret.
When Melody Patterson walked into the audition room for F Troop in 1965, she was hoping to land a small part, maybe a background role that would give her some experience. She certainly didn't expect to be cast as Wrangler Jane, one of the main characters on the show, but that's exactly what happened. There was just one problem, though, and it was a pretty big one. Melody Patterson was only 15 years old at the time, not the legal adult age that the producers were looking for to play a romantic interest opposite Ken Berry's Captain Parmenter. So what did she do? She lied about her age during the audition process, and apparently she was convincing enough that nobody questioned it. When she got the call that she had actually landed the role, both Melody and her mother knew they had a situation on their hands. They decided to keep the secret for as long as possible, waiting until just before filming was scheduled to start before finally revealing the truth to the show's producers. By that point, the producers had already made their decision and were committed to the show's production schedule, so firing her and starting over with a new actress would have caused major delays and financial problems. The producers eventually found out about her real age, but they chose to keep her on anyway because she had already proven herself to be professional and mature beyond her years during the early stages of production. However, this created some unexpected complications for the show's writers and directors. Because Melody was still legally a minor, there were strict rules about what kind of scenes she could film with adult actors. Ken Berry couldn't perform normal romantic scenes with her, like kissing or embracing, until she turned 16 years old, which was the age of consent at that time. To work around these limitations, the writers had to get creative with the relationship between Wrangler Jane and Captain Parmenter, making Jane the pursuer while Parmenter remained completely oblivious to her advances, always saying his famous line, "Please, Jane," not in front of the men, whenever she got too close. Melody Patterson was still only 17 years old when F Troop ended its run in 1967, and she didn't actually graduate from high school until after the show had left the air. Fact 4. The town drunk was really 65.
As to Corporal Agon.
Apologize to him, not in a million years.
When audiences watched F Troop during its 1965 to 1967 run, one recurring character left viewers absolutely convinced they were watching movie magic at its finest. The town drunk, known simply as Old Charlie, would regularly get thrown through the saloon doors or windows, bounce off a support post, fall face forward over the hitching rail, spin completely around, and land flat on his face or back. The stunt work was so impressive and energetic that most people naturally assumed the show had hired a young stuntman and covered him in old-age makeup to pull off these dangerous-looking pratfalls. After all, no elderly person could possibly perform such physically demanding stunts episode after episode, right? The truth was far more impressive than anyone imagined. The man performing these elaborate stunts was Harvey Perry, and he wasn't wearing any special makeup to look old because he actually was 65 years old when F Troop began filming. Even more remarkably, Perry had already been working as a professional stuntman for nearly 45 years by that point, meaning he'd started his career back in the silent film era of the 1920s. The role of Old Charlie was actually created specifically for Perry by the show's producers because they wanted to showcase his incredible skills and give audiences a chance to see a true Hollywood legend in action, even though he only appeared in 3 episodes total. Perry's stunt career was genuinely legendary in Hollywood circles. Over his 6-decade career, he doubled for some of the biggest names in cinema history, including John Wayne, Humphrey Bogart, Clark Gable, Edward G. Robinson, and George Raft. Because he stood only 5 feet 6 inches tall, he was also able to double for actresses like Shirley Temple, Mary Pickford, and Carole Lombard when needed. He'd been performing death-defying stunts since joining Mack Sennett Studios back in 1919, and he kept working well into his 80s. The fact that he could still execute perfect pratfalls in his mid-60s, making them look completely effortless and natural, is a testament to both his incredible physical conditioning and his mastery of the stunt performer's craft. Fact 5. Buster Keaton called to praise. Ken Berry.
Search the area, see if I can find this Lucky Pierre.
I think the only tail that's wagging is his.
What's that, sir?
Ken Berry received one of the most meaningful compliments of his entire career from someone who knew physical comedy better than almost anyone in Hollywood history. Buster Keaton, the legendary silent film star who had been performing death-defying stunts and perfectly timed pratfalls since the 1920s, personally called Berry on the telephone after watching an episode of F Troop that had aired the night before. Keaton simply told him, "That was a good gag you did last night." And for Berry, those few words meant everything. In a 2012 interview with the Television Academy Foundation, Berry recalled the moment with obvious pride and said, "Wow, that was high praise coming from Keaton, who was widely considered one of the greatest physical comedians who ever lived." What made this phone call so special was that Buster Keaton had earned his reputation by doing stunts that would terrify modern stunt coordinators, all while maintaining his famous deadpan expression that earned him the nickname the Great Stone Face. Keaton had performed incredible feats in silent films like The General and Sherlock Jr., and his influence on physical comedy was so profound that even decades later, comedians and actors still studied his work to learn the craft. For him to take the time to call Berry and acknowledge his work on a 1960s television sitcom showed genuine respect for what Berry was accomplishing on F Troop. Berry had been using his background as a trained dancer to create elaborate physical comedy sequences for the show, choreographing his own pratfalls over hitching posts, sabers, and trash cans with remarkable precision and timing. The scripts eventually just said, "Business to be worked out with Ken on the set," because the writers knew Berry would come up with something creative. Receiving validation from Buster Keaton, who understood exactly how difficult it was to make physical comedy look effortless while actually being quite dangerous and demanding, was the ultimate professional compliment for Berry's dedication to his craft. Fact 6. The show outperformed Star Trek in ratings.
I'm going to make a reconnaissance. I'll be back by sunset.
While F Troop might seem like a forgotten relic of 1960s television today, during its original run, the show was actually a massive hit that left some now legendary programs in the dust. F Troop ranked as ABC's second highest rated comedy during the 1965 to 1967 seasons, which meant it was pulling in viewership numbers that most networks would kill for. What makes this even more surprising is looking at exactly which shows F Troop was beating in the ratings battle, because the list includes some programs that went on to become cultural phenomena. Star Trek, which premiered in September of 1966 during F Troop's second season, never managed to crack the top 30 shows during its original run and consistently struggled in the ratings. While Star Trek eventually became one of the most beloved science fiction franchises in television history, spawning multiple spin-off series and a massive fan following, it was actually getting demolished by the misadventures of Captain Parmenter and his bumbling cavalry troop at Fort Courage. The same fate befell Gilligan's Island, another show that would go on to achieve legendary status in syndication, but couldn't match F Troop's viewership numbers during their overlapping seasons. The irony of this situation is almost painful when you consider how things turned out. Star Trek and Gilligan's Island are now household names that have been referenced and parodied countless times across decades of popular culture, while F Troop remains mostly remembered by devoted fans of classic television. The show's strong ratings make its cancellation even more baffling, since it clearly had an audience that loved watching Forrest Tucker, Larry Storch, and Ken Berry ham it up in their Wild West satire. The fact that F Troop was performing so well in the ratings yet still got the axe demonstrates just how much the corporate takeover by 7 Arts prioritized studio lot real estate over actual viewership success. Fact 7. Canceled despite success. Due to greed.
Well, you've been a hard-working, loyal employee of O'Rourke Enterprises, and this saloon has turned out to be a gold mine. Knock on wood. Sarge!
F Troop met its end not because viewers stopped watching, but because of corporate cost-cutting that had nothing to do with the show's actual performance. When Warner Brothers was sold to 7 Arts in November of 1966, the new owners took one look at the studio's operations and decided that dedicating so much valuable real estate to a single half-hour comedy series simply wasn't worth it. Regardless of how well the show was doing in the ratings, the show's ratings were actually still quite healthy after the second season wrapped in April of 1967. F Troop had consistently performed well for ABC, ranking as the network's second highest rated comedy during its run. The cast and crew fully expected to return for a third season, and the network was ready to renew the series. But Warner Brothers 7 Arts had different priorities, and those priorities centered on maximizing profit from their studio facilities rather than continuing successful television productions. Producer William Orr later confirmed that the studio was particularly unhappy about the added costs of producing the show in color during its second season. The first season had been filmed in black and white, which was significantly cheaper. But when the show switched to color for season 2, production expenses increased substantially. Combined with the amount of space the Western sets occupied on the Warner Ranch, 7 Arts executives decided the show was using too many resources for what they considered inadequate returns. Forrest Tucker, who played Sergeant O'Rourke, later shared his understanding of the cancellation, explaining that the new studio ownership believed it was wasteful for so much of the Warner Ranch to be tied up by a single half-hour television program. The outdoor sets, the fort, and all the western town facades took up considerable space that could potentially be used for multiple projects or rented out to other productions. In the end, F Troop became a victim of corporate restructuring and the bottom-line thinking that often follows major business acquisitions, proving that even successful shows aren't safe when new management starts looking at spreadsheets instead of ratings. Fact 8. The lookout was legally blind.
Oh, Corporal Agard, I was just looking for you.
What's up, Dobbs?
Captain Parman wants to see you and Sergeant O'Rourke in his office right away.
One of the most absurd running gags in F Troop centered around Private Vanderbilt, the fort's official lookout, who was played by actor Joe Brooks. The joke was simple but brilliant. The man responsible for spotting danger and protecting Fort Courage from enemy attacks could barely see anything at all, even when wearing his thick eyeglasses. According to Corporal Agarn in the show, Vanderbilt's vision was an astonishing 20/900 in each eye, which meant he was essentially legally blind whether he wore his glasses or not. This created countless moments of comedy throughout the series as Vanderbilt would peer out from his lookout tower and completely misidentify what he was seeing. In one memorable episode, 2 Native American warriors wearing full feather headdresses walked right up to the fort gates, and Vanderbilt allowed them to enter without any concern whatsoever. When questioned about why he let them pass, Vanderbilt calmly explained that he thought they were turkeys. The show often played this gag in reverse as well, with Vanderbilt mistaking actual flocks of turkeys for attacking Indian war parties and sounding the alarm, sending the entire fort into unnecessary panic. Before joining the Army, Vanderbilt had worked as a bustle inspector in a dress factory, which made his assignment as the fort's primary lookout even more ridiculous. His poor eyesight led to other mishaps beyond just confusing birds with people. In one episode, he fired his pistol in a crowded barracks and somehow managed to miss every single person in the room. When asked questions from his tower about what he could see in the distance, Vanderbilt would often give completely nonsensical answers like, "No thank you, Agern, I just had my coffee," showing he hadn't understood the question at all. The heavy-set Vanderbilt also became part of another famous running gag where the fort's malfunctioning cannon would knock down his lookout tower, sending him crashing to the ground along with the wooden structure. Fact 9. The captain won his promotion by sneezing.
I'll bet you $1 you're Kid Vicious. You win.
Captain Wilton Parmenter's rise from lowly private to commanding officer of Fort Courage is one of the most absurd origin stories in television history. And it all happened because of a sneeze at exactly the wrong moment. In the show's backstory, Parmenter was serving as a private in the Quartermaster Corps during the final days of the Civil War in 1865, which meant his job had nothing to do with combat whatsoever. On the day that would change his life forever, he was given a simple assignment that any soldier could handle: ride out and fetch the commanding officer's laundry, which was presumably General Ulysses S. Grant's personal uniforms and linens. As Parmenter rode off on his horse to complete this mundane errand, he began sneezing repeatedly, probably due to allergies or the dust kicked up along the trail. Unfortunately for him, or fortunately depending on how you look at it, a group of Union soldiers happened to be nearby and heard his loud sneezes echoing across the battlefield. In the chaos and confusion of war, these troops completely misunderstood what they were hearing and mistook his sneezing for the order to charge forward into battle. Believing they had received a direct command from an officer, the soldiers immediately launched an attack that turned the tide of the engagement and helped secure a Union victory at the Battle of Appomattox, effectively ending the Civil War. Because everyone believed Parmenter had intentionally led this brave charge, he was hailed as a war hero and given the nickname the Scourge of Appomattox. During the ceremony where he received his first medal, Parmenter's father, who was also his commanding officer, accidentally pricked him in the chest with the medal pin while trying to attach it to his uniform. This mishap earned Parmenter a Purple Heart for being wounded in action, making him officially the only soldier in history to get a medal for getting a medal. Based on his supposedly heroic record, the Army promoted him to captain and gave him command of Fort Courage, though the Secretary of War later admitted they were essentially dumping him at the Army's most useless outpost. Fact 10. Ken Berry choreographed his own pratfalls.
Well, I don't suppose you men would like some of my mother's cookies.
Oh, not just right now.
Thank you, sir.
Ken Berry brought something special to F Troop that most actors couldn't pull off, and it came from his background as a trained dancer. Before he ever became Captain Parmenter, Berry had spent years perfecting his skills as a song and dance man, touring with performance troupes, and studying the graceful movements that would later make his physical comedy so memorable. When the show's writers realized what Berry was capable of, they started leaving large portions of the script intentionally vague, trusting him to fill in the blanks with his own creative stunts and pratfalls. Eventually, the F Troop scripts began, including a simple note that said, "Business to be worked out with Ken on the set," whenever a scene called for Captain Parmenter to do something clumsy or physically comedic. This gave Berry complete freedom to choreograph his own falls, trips, and mishaps using whatever props or set pieces were available during filming. In a 2012 interview with the Archive of American Television, Berry explained that he would walk around the set looking for objects he could use, planning out elaborate sequences that combined his dancing ability with comedic timing. He specifically mentioned finding things in the set or outside that he could incorporate into his routines, treating each pratfall like a carefully choreographed dance number. Berry's skill at creating these moments was so impressive that it caught the attention of Buster Keaton, one of the greatest physical comedians in film history. The connection between Berry's work and the silent film era wasn't accidental, as Berry had grown up watching performers like Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly, studying how they moved and translating those lessons into his own unique style of physical humor. His ability to fall over hitching posts, stumble with his saber, or crash into various obstacles looked effortless on screen, but each movement was precisely planned and executed with the grace of a professional dancer who knew exactly how to make clumsiness look funny. Fact 11. The Cannon gag happened every episode.
Cannon? Wild Eagle wants us to give him our cannon?
If you watched F Troop regularly during its run from 1965 to 1967, you probably knew exactly what was coming every time someone approached the fort's cannon, and that predictability was entirely the point. The show featured one of the most elaborate and consistently repeated visual gags in television history, appearing in nearly every episode's opening credits during the first season and continuing throughout the series' run. The sequence always played out the same way. Whenever the cannon needed to be fired for a salute, someone would light the fuse, but instead of firing properly, the fuse would sputter and burn out completely. This would frustrate whoever was operating the cannon, usually Corporal Agarn or Private Dobbs, and they would respond by kicking the cannon's right wheel in anger. The kick would cause the wheel to collapse entirely, which would then tilt the cannon at a completely wrong angle and cause it to fire off target with the cannonball shooting in an unintended direction. The cannonball would inevitably strike one of the support legs of the fort's lookout tower, and the entire tower would come crashing down to the ground with whoever was stationed up there still inside it. In the running gag version, it was almost always the heavy-set Private Vanderbilt who came tumbling down with the collapsing tower, adding physical comedy to the mechanical disaster. The gag became so iconic that viewers would anticipate it, and the show's creators knew this, which is why they featured it so prominently in the opening credits, where it could set the tone for the absurd military incompetence that defined Fort Courage. The cannon malfunction wasn't just a one-time joke, but a carefully crafted recurring bit that demonstrated how nothing at this frontier outpost could function properly. Not even the most basic military equipment, and certainly not when operated by the bumbling soldiers of F Troop. Fact 12. Vincent Price played a vampire in February.
Where I come from in Transylvania, I was the only one on my block who was not a vampire.
F Troop decided to air a Halloween-themed episode right in the middle of winter, and nobody seemed to think this was strange at all. The episode, titled V is for Vampire, premiered on February 2nd, 1967 at 8 p.m. on a Thursday night, which was about as far from Halloween as you could possibly get. The show's creators clearly didn't care about seasonal timing when they had the chance to bring in one of horror's biggest stars to spoof his own image. Vincent Price played Count Sforza, a pale-faced immigrant from Transylvania who arrives at Fort Courage in a hearse with his pet crow that he calls Brother. The Count moves into what appears to be a haunted house on the edge of town, and Corporal Agarn becomes convinced he's dealing with an actual vampire. Price's character has this habit of saying good evening regardless of what time of day it actually is, which only makes Agarn more suspicious about his supernatural nature. When Wrangler Jane goes missing, O'Rourke, Agarn, and Captain Parmenter decide they need to investigate the Count's spooky mansion. The episode was perfectly timed for Vincent Price's career at that point, as he was at the absolute height of his horror film fame and had become famous for playing villains and creepy characters. This guest appearance gave him a chance to ham it up and make fun of the very image that had made him famous, something he would continue doing on other popular shows like The Brady Bunch and Get Smart. The episode featured all the classic vampire tropes, including secret passages and a mysterious self-playing organ in the haunted house, though everything gets a rational explanation by the end. For F Troop, it was just another example of how the show threw together whatever seemed entertaining, without worrying about whether it made any logical sense, mixing genres and time periods whenever the writers felt like it. Fact 13. A Beatle inspired a character name.
Are you Ringo Starr? Yes, sir.
In the mid-1960s, Beatlemania was sweeping across America, and F Troop's writers decided to have some fun with the biggest band in the world by creating a character whose name was a playful jab at one of the Fab Four. Private Leonard Ringo Starr made his first appearance in the second season episode, titled Ringo Starr and the Lady in Black, and his last name was a deliberate parody of Beatles drummer Ringo Starr, whose real name was Richard Starkey. The character was played by Henry Gibson, who would later become famous for his work on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In and his role in the film Nashville. What made Ringo Starr such a memorable character was his defining characteristic as the most jinxed soldier in the entire United States Army, bringing disaster and chaos wherever he went. In his first episode, Ringo arrives at Fort Courage and immediately brings bad luck to everyone around him, causing accidents and mishaps that make the already incompetent F Troop even more dysfunctional than usual. The writers gave two different explanations for the origin of his jinx across the 2 episodes he appeared in, which added to the absurdity of the character. The name Ringo itself was a perfect fit for someone who seemed to get everything wrong simply by existing in the same space as other people. The character proved popular enough to bring back for a second episode called The Return of Ringo Starr, where his curse of bad luck continued to wreak havoc on Fort Courage. Henry Gibson brought a perfect mixture of innocence and obliviousness to the role, playing Ringo as someone completely unaware of the chaos trailing behind him like a shadow. The Beatles reference would have been immediately obvious to viewers in 1966 and 1967, when the band was at the absolute peak of their fame and Ringo Starr was a household name across America. It was the kind of topical humor that F Troop loved to throw into their Old West setting, mixing contemporary cultural references with 1860s frontier life in ways that made no historical sense, but provided plenty of laughs. Fact 14. The delayed insult running gag.
Sarge, I'm sure my cousin can explain this.
You and your crooked relatives.
Wait a minute, Sarge.
One of F Troop's most memorable and genuinely clever running gags involved Sergeant O'Rourke complimenting Corporal Agern in the strangest possible way. Early in an episode, O'Rourke would turn to his partner in crime and say something like, "Agern, I don't know why everybody says you're so dumb," after Agern made a helpful suggestion or came up with a good idea. The line was delivered as a sincere compliment, with O'Rourke genuinely praising Agern for being smarter than people gave him credit for. Agern would usually just smile and nod, accepting the praise without thinking too deeply about what had actually been said. But here's where the genius of the gag came in. About 10 minutes later, sometimes in a completely different scene with an entirely different storyline happening, Agern would suddenly stop whatever he was doing. His face would change as the insult finally registered in his brain. He would turn to O'Rourke, who by this point had completely moved on and was focused on something else entirely, and demand, "Who says I'm dumb?" The beauty of this running gag was in the delayed reaction, showing that Agern was indeed slow on the uptake, which made the original insult even funnier in retrospect. Larry Storch, who played Corporal Agern, delivered these delayed reactions with perfect comic timing. The gag worked because it could happen at any moment during an episode, catching viewers off guard just as much as it caught Agern off guard when the insult finally sank in. Sometimes the delayed reaction would interrupt a tense moment or a completely unrelated conversation, making it even more absurd. The writers loved this running gag so much that they used it throughout both seasons of the show, and it became one of the most quoted and remembered elements of F Troop. Fans of the show still remember this bit decades later, proving that sometimes the simplest jokes, when executed with perfect timing, become the most unforgettable. Fact 15. Bob Steele played an Alamo survivor.
Look, Agern, no soldier ever has a good enough reason not to talk to his buddies.
One of the recurring characters on F Troop was Trooper Duffy, an elderly cavalryman who walked with a limp and constantly complained about his old Alamo injury acting up. Throughout the series, Duffy loved to recount his supposed exploits at the Alamo in 1836, standing shoulder to shoulder with Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie, backs to the wall during the famous siege. The only problem with this story is that no white adult males from that army survived the battle, making Duffy's tales obviously fictional tall tales told by a senile old soldier. What made this casting particularly clever was that Trooper Duffy was played by Bob Steele, a genuine Western movie and serial star from Hollywood's early days. Steele had been a major presence in Western films for decades before F Troop, and in a remarkable coincidence that the show's writers must have appreciated, he had actually appeared in a 1926 silent film called With Davy Crockett at the Fall of the Alamo, playing a role in that historic battle story some 4 decades before he joined the F Troop cast. This meant that when Duffy rambled on about fighting alongside Davy Crockett at the Alamo, Bob Steele had literally done exactly that in the movies, making the character's fictional memories a strange reflection of Steele's real cinematic past. The show's creators were clearly aware of Steele's Western credentials and his long history in the genre, which is why they gave him this specific character to play. His presence on the show added an extra layer of authenticity and insider humor that Western movie fans would have appreciated, even as the character himself was portrayed as a confused old-timer whose war stories couldn't possibly be true. The role was created specifically to showcase Steele's status as a veteran of Western entertainment, allowing him to play a senile cavalryman who just happened to claim participation in one of the most famous battles Steele himself had depicted on screen decades earlier.